I remember Mrs. Fairs, who was my guardian, came to fetch me and took me in her car to a very nice house in Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, where I was to live with their family for a short time until my family could get a visa or at least could send for me. So they assumed they were having this child for a short time. And they had a daughter who was 3 years older than me called Betty. And Betty had, in those days, 6pence a week pocket money. Now, can you imagine that? She was asked by her mother to learn to share. Poor Betty had to give me 3pence and keep 3pence. Do you know, she was never nasty about it. And she really was a very nice person. And we stayed friends until she sadly died about 4 years ago. I found life very difficult. I did manage to learn English, but you know, the food was strange. I'd never eaten white bread. Everything was different. Mrs. Fairs thought my table manners weren't very good because I didn't know that you put your knife and fork together. In England you do, in Czechoslovakia you don't. Everything was really different. And she wasn't an easy woman. She wasn't a bad woman, but she wasn't an easy woman. But her husband was the kindest, the warmest. Betty's father was the loveliest man that anybody could ever meet. He made a point of saying nice things about Jewish people all my childhood. He said things like, do you know, Vic Oliver, this amazing violinist, because Mr. Fairs was a very good musician, you can imagine how difficult it is to fool on the violinist like he does. And he's married our Prime Minister's daughter, and he did for a time marry one of Churchill's daughters. And he always tried to say nice things about Jewish people to me all my childhood. I got letters from home nearly every day, really. And I took those letters and my autograph book and all these things, and there was a garden shed, and I put all those treasures in the shed, and I would sit there and I imagined, you know, all my home, and I would think about my family. And Mrs. Fairs decided that this was very unhealthy. I should get used to life. I shouldn't sit and mope in this shed. I had to get used to it. I was learning English, and I really did feel that however good, and the Fairs were good to me, I wasn't loved in the way that you love your own children. I was treated well, but I wasn't their child. And Mr. Fairs couldn't have been a lovelier man. But I used to say that I go to church, and Mrs. Fairs would introduce me as their little refugee girl, and I didn't like this, and I always felt I was different, but I was treated with decency and with kindness. So there I was in school, and then one day was 1945, and we were having an English lesson. It was a girls' boarding school, and our teacher came into the room and said, "Girls, the war in Europe is over." And I yelled, you know, "Hooray!" And Vera, get out of the classroom and stop making this disturbance. There I was, in the corridor, outside the classroom, and I thought this was the happiest day of my life. I really thought it was. You know, I was standing there thinking, I'm going to go home. There I was, ready already to be home again. And then I got a letter from the Red Cross, and I heard that none of my family were alive. none of this could possibly happen. And I had to get on with my life in England.